Peter, let me bring you into this conversation. You have some new reporting for the Times tonight about when President Biden could make a decision. I've seen that reporting. Expand on the timeline, or explain the timeline for us in terms of what might be going on right now.
Right. Well, it's important, of course, to start with what the campaign and the White House are saying, which is the president has not decided to step aside. But having said that, there are conversations going on, as Kelly O'Donnell just mentioned, about what it would look like if, in fact, he did. And they're discussing dates. They're discussing, details, venues, and so forth. How would he do it? Would he do it from the home? Would he do it from the Oval Office? Would he do it by, camera and so forth? And one of the factors that we've heard about is, for instance, this upcoming visit by Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, who's scheduled to be in Washington on Wednesday addressing Congress at the invitation, or the initiative at least, of Republican leaders. That's meant to embarrass President Biden. That was the purpose of inviting him. And there's a feeling among Biden's team that, no, he would not want to step down if he does decide to step aside as the candidate before Netanyahu's visit, because he wouldn't want to give Netanyahu the satisfaction. There's a lot of strain right now between the two of them, and he wants to get through that Wednesday visit before any decision might be announced, if one is.
What are you hearing, Peter, about the president's reaction to these calls to drop out? I mean, how is he processing the growing number? It seems with every day there is a growing list of Democrats in the House, and the Senate side obviously a little bit slower, but names that are coming forward and going public with the calls for him to step aside. And that must be, to some extent, either getting under his skin or making him disappointed in them.
Yeah, I think both. I think hurt and angry, the quote you just showed, is right. He's in his beach house in Rehoboth Beach, still suffering from COVID, hacking away and abandoned by people that he considered to be close allies. Most notably, of course, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, both of whom have had frank conversations with him about the odds this fall if he were to stay on the ballot. And of course, his old running mate, Barack Obama, who, while has not said anything publicly in weeks, is perceived by Biden and his camp to be nudging things along and pushing for him to step aside. So there's a lot of resentment there. There's some bitterness. I heard a way the president has framed as, the architects of the 2010 midterm debacle under President Obama are telling him that he should step aside when he, in fact, presided over the 2022 midterm elections that were better than expected for Democrats. So who are they to talk? You can hear that kind of bitterness in those kind of comments.
Senator, how do you see how this is playing out right now? I mean, more of your former colleagues say the president should leave the race. What do you think about how this is all playing out right now? That it started on the kind of fringes, if you will, a lot of anonymous members of Capitol Hill. And then as the days have gone on, more names, more senators, more representatives are coming forward and making these calls public.
I think what you're seeing is a lot of frustrated people who are down ballot, who are looking at a lot of poll numbers, and who over the last 3 weeks have waited to see the president adequately address the concerns, meet the moment. You remember he did a press conference regarding presidential immunity right after the debate, did not take questions, backed away, did not really respond to this concern. And so I think a lot of them would tell you they've been fairly patient and that they feel like they need to say something to really express concern to get it through. The last reaction this president should have to all of this is anger and bitterness. It should be a response. It should be proving, yes, I can win. This is the path forward. I remember Richard Blumenthal, a clear ally, not somebody who would take any drastic step, coming out of White House meeting, basically saying, I asked for an explanation of how we're going to win, and I didn't receive it. And so, in part, if he's angry and bitter, he should, kind of think about how the campaign has responded the last 3 weeks and realize there hasn't been an adequate assurance that he can win. This isn't about not liking him or resenting him. And so to respond with anger is only going to generate more rancor, I think. And so if he wants to keep the job, I guess he can do that. He's the only person who can make that decision. But at this point in time, that the concerns are real and they're backed up with data, and there isn't an adequate response coming from the campaign.
Charlie, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez perhaps gave us a glimpse of what is under the hood, if you will, in terms of the conversations taking place. And part of the reason why, as she explained it, there is some concern, certainly from hers and others, to slow down this process because there is not enough consensus about who replaces Biden on the ticket. And more importantly, the concern that there is perhaps some plotting or scheming behind the scenes to try and remove Kamala Harris, the vice president, who many believe should be the candidate. How big of a problem is this lack of consensus right now?
Well, I mean, the lack of consensus is obviously a huge problem. I just don't get the sense that that there's any plan B that does not really involve Kamala Harris. I mean, there may be talk about an open convention, but it seems inconceivably that at the end of the day they would bypass the vice president. But I just want to echo what the senator had to say about the anger and the bitterness. Peter's reporting in the New York Times, along with his colleagues, really raises the prospect that things can get very ugly for the Democrats right now. It feels like a game of mutual recrimination, but also something akin to a deadly game of chicken. You know, who will blink if in fact you have the irresistible force meeting the immovable object? What will happen? Now, maybe they're just simply passing through this, but if and when Joe Biden steps aside because he believes it's time to pass the torch, the way he does it is going to be crucial.
Right.
The way he does it will determine whether or not there are deep wounds, there are scars, whether he is gracious when he passes the torch, or whether or not he feeds into this sense that he has been pushed out. But I do think that the issue of Kamala needs to be addressed very, very clearly. She is the vice president of the United States. If anything happened to him, she would become the president. If he is reelected over the next 5 years, I don't want to be morbid, but there's certainly a chance that she could succeed. And I think the Democrats at some point have to say that they're comfortable if, in fact, she's at the head of the ticket. So I don't sense, I hear the chatter about the open convention, but I don't think it's serious, and I don't think that there's any realistic chance that if Joe Biden steps aside, that the nominee would not be Kamala Harris.
Peter, there was a group of foreign policy and national security officials who sent a letter urging President Biden to step aside. In part, they write, "We strongly believe that ongoing concerns surrounding your continued candidacy and the growing likelihood of an electoral college victory for Donald Trump put your national security accomplishments and our country and your legacy at an unacceptable level of risk." It's one thing to hear it from politicians who certainly have their motives, perhaps because they are on vulnerable down ballot races or because they are experiencing some vulnerability of their own. But how does a message like this from national security officials, obviously, how are messages like this likely to land within the Biden campaign?
Well, look, they're appealing to his patriotism, right? They're trying to say that, you have spent your career, more than 50 years, advancing the interests of the United States, and you've had these accomplishments in the last 4 years that you can be proud of. But it's time, in fact, to think about the country at a larger level, and that goes beyond your own political interests. And I think they're trying to, appeal to the part of Biden that is public service oriented. Now, does he listen to that? Who knows? He does obviously care much about his stewardship of international affairs. That's something he's proud of. That's something he takes seriously. That's something that has always been important to him. At the same time, a politician listens to other politicians, right? And Charlie knows this, and Senator Heitkamp knows this. I mean, politicians, respect those who have gone through the process. What this president has said often to aides who give him advice he doesn't particularly like is, well, what have you ever been elected to? You've never been elected to anything, which, by the way, is a line that's famous for LBJ. He would say, you've never been elected dog catcher. So there's a respect that elected officials have for other elected officials when they tell him something like that. He may not like it, but he's definitely listening, I think, in a way he wasn't before, to former Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer and the others. We'll see where it leads him.
Charlie, you spent time at the RNC this week in your home state, so you had a front row seat to some of this. But there's a tell in terms of what the Republicans think about what is happening on the Democratic side, and their silence is the tell. How badly do you think Republicans want President Biden to stay on top of the ticket?
Very much so. The signage and almost every conversation you have is about Joe Biden. This whole campaign is geared up to go after Joe Biden. Now, there are Republicans, of course, think that Kamala Harris would be beatable, that they're vulnerable. But as you point out, that silence is really a tell that they are not pushing him out. That even Donald Trump mentioned him only twice. So I think that there is a sense that right now, if nothing changes, they are feeling the wind at their back. They are feeling a lot of momentum, despite that awful speech last night, and Donald Trump reminding us that he's Donald Trump. But they are feeling optimistic. But if he drops out, if that ticket changes, everything changes. Everything is scrambled. And so I think that if you were to ask most of the delegates, they would tell you that they want things to stay exactly as they are right now.